Welcome to the Danny Clinkscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Insightful and witty commentary, probing interviews, and detours from the beaten path.
Welcome to Kansas City Profiles presented by Easton Roofing. Last Friday, many of you enjoyed the first part of our two-part series. I don't know if two parts is a series, but it's two parts anyway of our profile of Ryan Lefebvre. The first part of his story was being raised in California, eventually going to the University of Minnesota, a life surrounded by baseball, but not completely immersed in it, eventually turning to broadcasting after a very short professional career, and in no short order, making it to the major leagues by the age of 25. And when we left last time around, we were starting the Kansas City chapter of Ryan Lefebvre's life, one that would be fraught with successes, challenges, personal triumphs, finding romance, raising a family, all those type of things. But we will start it up right where we left it off, which was right as Ryan was getting the job with the Kansas City Royals, an interesting story that ended up in a restaurant in Wisconsin, and it's been on from there. So enjoy this personal, thoughtful, and very forthright account of the time in Kansas City for Ryan Lefebvre in part two of our Kansas City Profiles, presented by Easton Roofing, right here on the Danny Clinkscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. We're here with Joe Spiker, the CEO and president of Easton Roofing. And Joe, you had a great year in 2019, a record year. 2020 comes, things are moving smoothly along, and then the coronavirus comes. But your company seemed to be very ready, very proactive, and very ready to serve your customers well.
Yeah, we adopted social distancing very early before the cities even put out the notices, and we started working from home. We are largely cloud-based as a company, so that transition was easy. Our technicians are wearing masks and gloves, and salespeople are not meeting with homeowners. We're doing everything digitally and doing everything we can to do our part to get over this as quickly as possible.
So for any needs that people have right now, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Well, you can always call us, 913-257-5426, but the best way is to go to eastonroofing.com. Put your information in and we'll give you a call.
Easton Roofing. Integrity matters. Cinematic Visions has been an affordable solution for professional media production in Kansas City since 2003, offering award-winning video production and creation, as well as a wide array of digital and social media management services. From planning, scripting, filming, editing, and post-production, to delivering your product to a watching world, Cinematic Visions will provide professional and affordable services for you and your business with the necessary return on investment to make it all worthwhile. Cinematic Visions' goal is to unlock the power of storytelling through video and a strong online presence for your company. Beyond the numbers, they want to inspire and evoke your clients to feel and act. Let my friends at Cinematic Visions embed your brand where it belongs, in your customers' minds. You can find them online at cinematicvisions.com or with a quick phone call at 816-600-6300.
Hey everyone, this is Matt Llewellyn from 23rd Street Brewery, wishing you well while you stay safe during this time of uncertainty. Due to the recent news, you won't be able to get the same in-restaurant experience at the 23rd Street Brewery that you've come to expect over the past 16 years. But you can get the same delicious items prepared with the highest level of staff cleanliness available for carryout and delivery through our partners Eat Street. You can also still enjoy our craft beers and crowlers for to-go service. So remember, stay safe, and together we will all get through this time of uncertainty.
If you'd like to join these and other great sponsors and market your business to a growing and engaged audience, contact us at danny@dannyclinkscale.com. Look forward to hearing from you.
Ryan, when last we convened, you had just taken the Royals job and thought that a good omen was the fact that you had dinner that evening in a little town in Wisconsin, and the special for the night was the Kansas City Strip. So you had your omen, you had your job, you made your big decision. Tell me about what it was like when you first got to Kansas City.
Well, the next best thing that happened was I flew in to Kansas City to be part of the caravan, the winter caravan, which I believe was in late January. So this was about a month later. And I had known Denny from my days with the Twins. I knew Fred and Paul Splittorff better than I knew Denny. But Denny and I had a few conversations over the years. But, you know, he and Fred had been together for 25 years, and now here comes this young guy who was 27, about to turn 28 years old. And so before I went out on the caravan, Denny and I had dinner at Jack Stack in Martin City. And we sat down, and it was very reassuring, I think, for the both of us. I remember, and you probably remember this too, Danny, but there was this thought that maybe Entercom and the Royals would go out and hire, and the word they used was screamer, that they wanted somebody to really liven up the radio broadcast, and that someone that would go bananas every time somebody made a great play or hit a home run. And it was, that was a time when a lot of announcers, and I was one of them, I'm sure, wanted to have a big call because it might be on Plays of the Week on SportsCenter. And so I just remember that kept coming up, a screamer type. Jeffrey Flanagan was writing at the Kansas City Star in his top of the morning column, and I remember after I accepted the job, Don Fortune had me on that night, and we talked about my style of being a broadcaster, and I said, well, I don't want to disappoint anybody, but I'm not really a screamer. And I remember he said, well, good, I'm glad to hear that. But, so I think Denny just wanted to know where I was coming from, and I think he was probably more interested in how I saw a radio broadcast than I was on how he saw a radio broadcast, because I came in, I was just going to do the game however Denny wanted to do the game. And I knew that I had enough to deal with as it was sitting in Fred White's chair. And I'd seen other guys in the business, not many at this point, because I'd only been in the business, at least at the major league level, for 4 years. But I saw guys get a big opportunity somewhere, and rather than just trying to fit in and gradually allow their personality to come through over time, whether that's weeks or months or years, some guys just saw, well, here's my time to shine, and would just overdo it. And it always seemed to backfire. So I went in there just however Denny wants to do the broadcast, that's how I'm going to do the broadcast. And so we were at Jack Stack, and we had a great meal, and we started comparing notes, and he got the Royals job when he was 25. I got the Twins job when I was 24. We both played college sports. His father was a coach and a great athlete at Illinois State. My dad was a Major League Baseball player and coach and manager, and we had a lot of laughs. I mean, we laughed really hard over goofy things that happened in our careers and funny things we said on the air. And I think you'd have to ask him this, but when he dropped me off at I believe it was the Quarteridge Hotel in Westport, I think we both just felt good going into spring training in that it was going to work out. I don't think there weren't any red flags at that dinner where I was concerned or he was concerned. I mean, we still had to figure it out on the air, but it was just very reassuring for the both of us. And then the next day I went out on a winter caravan, and that was kind of the beginning of my Royals career.
We think of the Royals being bad for so long, but they had not been bad for that long at that point in time. Mm-hmm. So probably about 5, since the strike was really when things went downhill for the Royals. So going out on the caravan, and right around the turn of the century, a couple of 3 of those, those teams, there was some promise there. There were some young players. They scored a lot of runs. They would not end up having the success they would want, and we can get into that. But you weren't walking into maybe what people would think of now, way back then.
Yeah. Well, there was no Facebook. There was no Twitter. There were fewer ways for fans to express their displeasure with an announcer. They'd call in on a talk show and say, I don't like this guy. And I think I remember going on, there was a rain out, and you were doing the post-game show, and I remember going on a show with you at that old booth behind the radio broadcast booth before the Kauffman Stadium was renovated, and there was a few people that called in to let me know to my face that they didn't appreciate my style my first year there. They might send a letter to the editor or even just a letter directly to me or the Royals. I mean, that was it. So I know that fans were disappointed that Fred wasn't doing the games. I mean, you had a whole generation of fans that, grew up listening to the Royals and hearing, Denny and Fred together, the glory years of the Royals, the 70s and the 80s. I mean, that was Denny and Fred on the radio. So, I mean, I didn't take that personally, but I know that there was a lot more, I'm sure, that just was not able to be expressed compared to if it happened today. I mean, if it was on today, it would be all over Twitter, it'd be all over Facebook, and it's harder today, I think, to to fly under the radar. But it was it was tough. I mean, I knew what to expect, but at the same time, I mean, it still was difficult because I was also in a foreign land. You know, I really didn't have any roots here. I really didn't have many friends. So I mean, I would just go back to my apartment by myself, and I think it's just human nature to dwell more on the negatives than the positives. And so, you know, if I made a mistake on the air, I'd think about it the whole drive back to my apartment and think about it the next day and wanted to atone for it. And, you know, on that night's broadcast. And as I just learned over time to just, you know, it's a new day, kind of like the mentally strong players do. You know, you just kind of turn the page and go on to the next day. But I don't think I answered your question, but to your question, the Royals lost 97 games that year. And as you said, they set a team record for runs scored. They had a tremendous offense. The starting pitching was okay, but the bullpen was really bad. And in 99, I believe the Royals had more blown saves than they did actual saves, which is quite a feat. And the very next year, the exact same thing happened. I mean, the offense got even better. They set another team record for runs scored. And they, you know, Tony Muser was the manager, and if there was anything Tony Muser demanded, it was to play hard. And these guys played hard. They ran out ground balls. They were really good defensively. They were good fundamentally on offense. They also had some firepower on offense. But I mean, it was one devastating loss after another in the 7th, 8th, and 9th innings. And so it goes for a broadcaster. When a team's doing well, we get more credit than we deserve. I mean, I've always said, you know, during a World Series game, I could go on and just give you the count and the score for 3 hours, and if the Royals win, people are going to be like, oh, you were great tonight. Or you could tell the greatest stories in the world and be right on with the game and have some big calls, and if the team loses, you know, you're just going to be associated with the bad news you're delivering. So I'm sitting in Fred's chair, and the Royals lost 97 games in devastating fashion that season. That didn't help me at all.
Yeah, and also, when you're the second, you're just doing radio then, and when you're the second announcer of, you know, you come on in the 4th inning. I don't know, is that the way it broke out, or was it 2-2, whatever it is? But anyway,
yeah, third inning, yep.
Yeah, and kind of, you know, the first guy gets to empty the gun on the on the game notes. So how do you develop a style as the second guy?
Yeah, that's probably the hardest job in Major League Broadcasting, and I say hardest, of course, in quotations. But yeah, you're right. The first 2 innings on radio or television, for that matter, I mean, there's so much material to set the stage. You know, how are the Royals doing? If they're playing the Red Sox, how have the Red Sox been doing? Here's our starting pitcher. Here's their starting pitcher. Here's their lineup. Here's our lineup. Here's how they're playing defensively. Here's how we're playing defensively. And there's just so much material to set the stage. And yeah, you come on in the 3rd inning, and this is just part of the learning process for young broadcasters. I had to prepare differently because I would prepare like Denny would prepare. And so by the time I'd come on in the 3rd inning, you know, 80% of what I wanted to say was gone. He already used it.
Right.
And I really prided myself, and Denny the same, in that, you know, when Denny, even to this day, when Denny and I do a radio game together, and we do about 25 to 30 during the regular season, there are times where we don't talk much to each other, but we're always listening to each other. And Denny and I have always had the shared opinion that if one guy is just rolling along, the other guy doesn't have to jump in as if to say, hey, I'm here too, don't forget about me. You know, we've really done a good job of giving each other space, and it's more of probably a throwback radio broadcast than the back and forth, you know, talk show format that you'll see with a lot of broadcasts now. And I learned this from Denny early on. He would come back on in the 5th, or he'd come back on in the 8th, and he'd say, Ryan told you, and then he would repeat something that I had said a couple of innings ago. And I just thought that was a great way of rephrasing something that I had said, or, you know, of course, no one listens, I don't think, you know, has their ear up against the radio for every pitch of all 9 innings. So there is room for recapping or retelling a story. But, you know, that's something that Denny has always done. I mean, and I try and do the same thing. Is if he's on, I'm listening. So I would literally in my mind be going, well, I can't tell that story. Well, I can't use that fact. So I really, I mean, and so you couple that with a losing team, where there's not a lot of exciting things going on as far as wins and losses. I mean, for me as a broadcaster, I really had to dig deep during those losing seasons and then coming on in the third and fourth innings.
What was the transition like? You mentioned at first you didn't have friends, you were in a foreign place. When did maybe things pick up for you a little on the you're a single guy at this point in time. How long did it take for you to develop some kind of quality of life here in Kansas City?
Yeah, well, at that time I was still the same age as the players. And so then there was a great group of guys, beginning with that very first caravan. And the Royals, at least compared to the Twins those days, did a fantastic job on their caravan. I mean, I remember going out on caravans with the Twins, and they were fun. They were well done, but it was with, two or three players, maybe one alumni player, and that was it. My first caravan with the Royals, I get on the bus, and there's Mike Sweeney, and there's Johnny Damon, and there's Shane Halter. Who am I missing? Larry Sutton, and probably a couple more other guys that the names just aren't coming to me immediately, along with an alumni, someone from the front office. Slugger was on there. I mean, it was a big group of people, and it was a lot of fun. And all those guys were about my age. They were either my age or maybe I was a little bit older. And so it helped me that I wouldn't say that I hung out with the players, because from the very beginning I was coached not to do that, even though I may have had a few moments in my days in Minnesota. But I really wanted, more than anything, I wanted to remind myself and them that I'm not one of them, and I'm okay with that. You're the players, I'm a broadcaster, and I'm going to give you your space. And I wanted them to know that I don't think that I should be running around with them. But Mike Sweeney and I became close friends. We're both from Southern California. We both have a very similar faith background. We were single. We both had similar goals in life. And so being friends with Mike, and about that time too, Nate Bukaty came back to town from Moberly, Missouri, after growing up in Kansas City, and we were about the same age. And when I went from my apartment to my first house before the 2001 season, that kind of made it feel like home too. I mean, I had real neighbors, and at that point I was spending my off seasons in Kansas City, and it really began to feel like home. And this goes back to a question that you had asked earlier. I mean, I figured, okay, I'll go to Kansas City for 2 or 3 years, and then I'll return triumphantly to Minnesota.
Right.
Well, I got a 2-year contract. My first contract in Kansas City was for 2 years, and then when I signed back on after that, it was for 3 years, and that's when I moved here full time. And so I figured, well, I'm going to be here for 3 more years, and it helped me kind of begin to cut the cord in Minnesota. And I think just having a house and neighbors and a regular commute to the ballpark and starting to make more friends helped a lot.
2003 at the ballpark, you meet the woman who would become your wife, Sarah. How did that come about?
So Sarah's father was a Marine, and so she's lived all over the world. And they settled in Kansas City when she was in middle school. So this is the place she's been the longest by far, or had been the longest by far at that point. And so she had always done later medical mission trips, but with her youth group at whatever church she was attending, she always would take missions trips around the world. And she had been to India, she had been to Thailand, she'd been to Mexico. And when she was on these missions trips, she would help out with the medical clinics. And so she always thought, boy, it'd be great to be a nurse or a doctor someday and go over on these missions trips and be part of these procedures and be of some real help in a third world country. So later in life, she just woke up one day and realized, what am I doing? I only get one shot at this. And so she went back to school. She went back to nursing school. And while she was going to nursing school, she was working at, I believe it was Fedora on the plaza. And the ownership group, the management group of Fedora also had the rights to the dining rooms and the suites at Kauffman Stadium. So she had a manager named Matt Miller, who was at Kauffman Stadium for a long time, who tried to persuade her to come out and work at the stadium when the team was in town. And Sarah is not a sports fan at all. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on just funny things she said about sports since we've been married. But finally, she was persuaded to go out there, and you remember her. I mean, she worked in the media dining room at Kauffman Stadium in 2003 and 2004 while she was, putting herself through nursing school. And that's how we met. And we were friends, strictly friends, for 4.5 years. We just kind of went in and out of each other's lives. She'd be dating somebody, and then I'd be dating somebody. But we always seemed to just reconnect and get together and talk about life and have these long talks about where we were in our lives and what we wanted out of our lives. And so after 4.5 years of friendship, we started officially dating in October of 2017. We were engaged in December of 2007. We officially started dating in October of 2007. We were engaged in December of 2007, and we were married in February of 2008. So over the course of 4 months, we went from being friends, strictly friends, to married.
That's a pretty fast-track thing, and we'll obviously return to baseball a bit. But this is also about the time where you would be public and eventually write a book about your battle with depression, which is an extremely courageous thing to do. I wrote a book. I made a couple of asides to short periods in my life where I battled it, but I didn't have the courage to talk about it at length, and I didn't have the courage to talk about it with anybody when I was going through it. But obviously, you helped a lot of people with that. But here you are, you have this great job. Now you're obviously have developed a relationship. And I think a lot of people don't understand how a seemingly happy world can be completely separate from the mental health aspects of your life. And can you explore that a little bit for us?
Well, to take it back a few years before that, in January of 1998, I realized that I had a problem with alcohol. And so I quit drinking. This was the third time that I quit drinking, but it ended up being the last time that I quit drinking. And this was before my last year in Minnesota. And it was time. I mean, I was on my way to just throwing everything right down the drain. And so people were patting me on the back, good for you. And I was rather resolute. I mean, I was never really tempted to start drinking again or really be a part of that scene. But I never had any formal counseling. I never went to AA meetings. I wasn't against any of that. I took a 6-week leave of absence in January of 1998, and I went to my grandparents' house in Wisconsin. They were snowbirds, and they would spend part of their winter in Arizona and part of their winter in Florida visiting friends. And so I was in their house for 6 weeks, all by myself. My bosses in Minneapolis gave me the time off to just figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I went back a different person. But I never really understood why I drank in the first place. I think I just chalked it up to being a young guy. I mean, before that, just being a college guy at a major university and being an athlete. And before that, just being a high school kid in Los Angeles and getting caught up in the so-called scene. But what I came to discover was that I was a pretty insecure person at my core, and it was alcohol that helped me adapt to social settings that would otherwise be uncomfortable. So I'm around a lot of friends and a lot of support in 1998, my first year, being sober. And then the next year I come to Kansas City, and now I'm all alone. And then in 2000, the same thing. And going back to a previous question, it helped when I moved into my first house and felt like, I was more part of the community. But there was just this anxiety that was slowly building up inside of me, because as destructive as it was, alcohol was my medication. It was my way of coping, and I was becoming very antisocial. And so it just built up until I really just couldn't, hold back the dam any longer. And in 2005, the summer of 2005, I literally had a breakdown right in the middle of the season, to a point where I realized I can't do this. I can't do this by myself. And so my mom, who is a 2-time survivor of clinical depression, pointed me in the right direction, and I got into some serious counseling. I had a life coach. I was on medication for 3.5 years. And meanwhile, trying to get myself through a Major League Baseball season, which also happened to be the worst one in Royals history. They lost 106 games. So there was a lot going on that year. But as I began to get better, and I didn't know, Danny, I didn't know if I was going to get better, to be honest with you. I mean, it was
right.
It was just a very rocky time in my life, both professionally, personally, as far as, relationships at the time with friends and with girlfriends, and there was just a lot going on that I needed to get through. But my counselor was great, my life coach was great, the medication helped. But the thing that was most therapeutic was when I began to become comfortable sharing my story with other people. There were people close around me that would say, yeah, I had something like that happen to me about 3 years ago, or I had something just like that happened to me about 10 years ago, or something like that happened to me 5 years ago. And the worst part about depression is feeling all alone and that no one's going to understand. And to your point, especially a guy, who's in his early 30s and he lives in a nice house on Lake Winnebago and is driving a nice car and he's a major league broadcaster. I mean, why in the world would I be depressed? What do I have to be depressed about?
Right.
Which just kind of adds to the shame of the whole thing. But when people started to share their stories with me and I could look at them, how they were as they were sharing the story, and they clearly were recovered from it, and they'd put their life back together, and they were married, and they had kids, all the things that I wanted. And I realized that I had a unique platform to share my story. That's the reason why I wrote the book, because I thought if other people's stories could help me, maybe my story could help others.
How much did the development of your relationship into a romance and a marriage help at that point in time, or were you kind of past it by then?
No, there were failed relationships that year, the year after that. I mean, I hadn't gotten that part figured out. It wasn't until about 2007 when I just realized I was just trying too hard, way too hard, to figure out this relationship on my own. And I wanted to be married, and I wanted to have kids. And growing up in Los Angeles, it was, I used to joke, like, my best friends in at one point in my mid-30s, all of my best buddies in Los Angeles were single except for one. And at the same time, I could say that all my best buddies in Minnesota were married except for one. I mean, it was a completely different, deal compared to, the difference in culture in the Midwest and the West Coast. But I wanted to be in the group that was married and had kids because, I'd accomplished enough professionally that I felt like that was the missing link. So I was really trying too hard until I finally just decided I'm just going to shut this down for a year. I'm just not going to date. And, when the right person comes along, it won't be rushed. And that's when Sarah re-entered my life again. And it was about April of 2007 when we reconnected as friends again. And we just stayed friends until, we started dating officially that October.
Do you remember how? You better remember. I've done a couple of these where a guy doesn't remember something, and then I'll meet his wife later, and she'll go, "I remember the first movie we went to." But do you remember how you proposed?
Oh yeah, I mean it was. I'll never forget that, and there was a lot of symbolism to it. So I come from a Catholic background, and I don't remember exactly what pointed me in this direction, but I used to take retreats up at Conception Abbey in northwest Missouri, and I would go hang out with the monks. I would go there every All-Star break. I would go there for at least a week at the end of every season, and I would try and get up there for a few days before the next season began. And it was a spiritual retreat for me. It was just a very holy place for me. It still is. And despite what someone might think about a monk and their black habit with the hood on and all the silence and whatever, the monks are just wonderful listeners because they spend so much time in silence and contemplation and in prayer, and they're not selling anything up there. The only thing they're selling is retreats and people just coming up there and unwinding and resting and just hitting the reset button. And so it really became another home for me up there. And so it was up there in April of 2007, and I was inspired by a homily given by one of the monk priests, about just literally or figuratively leaving something on the altar and walking away from it and trusting that God will take it, he will bless it, and he will return it to me. And I realized that it was dating. And so I went for a walk afterward, and I was going around, it's called Placid Lake, not to be confused with Lake Placid in your neck of the woods, but Placid Lake, named after a monk, Father Placid, who had been at Conception Abbey years and years ago, is when I had, I just had the epiphany that, what I need to do? I need to just stop trying, at least for a year. And that doesn't mean I can't interact with women and be friends with women, but at least for a year, I need to quit. I need to quit dating. I'm doing this wrong. I'm doing it by my rules. I need to be more faithful in the way I'm doing this. And I remember the spot where I was standing when it happened. Well, it ended up being a year and a half until I started dating Sarah. But I proposed to her on that spot, that very spot.
Wow.
So the journey began on that spot, and it ended on that spot.
That's a remarkable story.
Yeah.
More of Danny's Reasonably Irreverent podcast after this.
My friends at Advanced Sports and Family Chiropractic and Acupuncture are among the most accomplished and trusted clinics in the nation. Only one clinic has been rated in the top 5 in all 3 categories of chiropractic care, acupuncture, and rehabilitation, and that clinic is ASFCA. They have locations in Olathe, Overland Park, Prairie Village, Belton, and Lee Summit. Doctors Brad and Christina Woodle and their accomplished team of doctors and therapists will treat you like family, for the simplest of injuries to the most complicated conditions to avoid surgery. Whether you are seeking treatment for an injury or just looking to stay healthy and fit, this is the place for you. And it's been the place for me for almost 2 years now. I have been a strenuous daily exerciser for years, and as time goes on, that takes its toll. But regular appointments at Advanced Sports and Family Chiropractic and Acupuncture have helped keep me ticking on, and even as the years pile up, their regular care has allowed me to keep to my regimen and feel great. If you want to feel the same, give them a call or visit them at asfca.com/Danny. They accept all insurances and are open Monday through Saturday, and make sure to mention that Danny Clinkscale recommended Advanced Sports and Family Chiropractic and Acupuncture.
For many people, a family law case will be one of the most difficult experiences in their life. The law firm of Kenneth McRae will help you through it. Personal and effective help from Ken in concert with you will develop a unique strategy for your unique case. As Ken always says, divorce can be civil law, not civil war. Licensed in Kansas? Visit McRaeLawOffice.com or call 913-972-4765.
We're visiting with Larry Marshall, former Chiefs defensive back and punt returner and now a Chiefs ambassador. Larry is a former pro football player with the aches and pains that come with that. And moving on in age, as we all are, what do the Canaway CBD products do for you?
It's been a great relief for me. Being a punt and kickoff returner, collisions were a mainstay of my career, and these Canaway products, the salve especially, has really helped me try to get through every day with the aches and pains that I've had over a career of 7+ years in the NFL.
I get similar benefits as well, particularly with my back. Certainly wasn't a football player. What's the best way for our listeners to get more information about the great products themselves?
Well, I'm so enthused about it, Dana. They just contacted me at larrymarshall.canaway.com, and I can give them all the information they need to help them get through the day as well.
Start gaining all the benefits that Larry and I do from the trusted and reliable line of Canaway products. As Larry said, visit larrymarshall.canaway.com and get information on all the great products from Canaway. If you'd like to join these and other great sponsors and market your business to a growing and engaged audience, contact us at danny@dannyclinkscale.com. Look forward to hearing from you. Our guest is Ryan Lefebvre. He, of course, is one of the longtime voices of the Royals. You can never say voice. Well, Denny still holds that one. You'll be the voice of the Royals when he walks away.
And always will.
But let's return to baseball now. You mentioned that the Royals had some promise when you first got there, but that just turned into losses. Then it got really bad, and good baseball men, people who knew what they were doing, could not succeed. The economics of the game were more difficult, even for a small market team, than they are now. And so, the Royals just became a bad franchise for no other, on the field, for no other way to put it. And you're going through a lot of things in your life, and I think I'll know the answer to this because I know from doing a lot of games, even for bad teams, that each night can be different. Do you think people have a misunderstanding of how difficult it is to do a play-by-play job, and maybe how difficult that it's really not as difficult as they think to call loss after loss after loss?
Yeah. Well, something I had to learn, and I'm grateful for that time, to be honest. I mean, it was a dreadful period in not only Royals history, but baseball history. I mean, the Royals, when they won that wild card game, that was the longest consecutive streak of seasons without going to the postseason in North American sports, professional sports, period. Any sport at any level in professional sports. So, I mean, it was a long, dreadful time, and the Royals were the punchline of, bad team jokes. I think David Letterman would use them in his top 10 every now and then. And I mean, it was hard. It was really hard because it was obviously a proud franchise, very proud franchise, a model franchise for a long time with a, beautiful ballpark. And it was just really hard. And I think over time, we all kind of felt the apathy growing, the lack of attendance, obviously, and people just paying attention to what was going on with the Royals. And I think that most fans who came out to the ballpark, they were not engaged fans, and I don't blame them for that. But, I think of places like, like St. Louis or Boston or New York or wherever, that's just notorious for fans that are just engaged all the time. And it also happened in Kansas City when the Royals went to the 2 World Series. But, that sometimes a routine play is made and you don't even think twice about it, and the crowd will erupt in applause. And you think, what was that all about? Well, because that guy made 2 errors the night before, and the fans are paying attention to that.
Right.
And then and that would never happen at Kauffman Stadium, just because there was no reason to pay close attention to what was going on with the Royals. I remember Johnny Damon came back in 2001 with the A's. And when I do games on radio, I love to use the public address announcer's voice in the background just to help people driving around, whatever, feel like they're at the ballpark. I always say that's radio's answer to high-definition television. But Johnny Damon came back, and I told Denny, I said, hey, before I throw it to you in the top of the first inning, Johnny Damon's leading off. I said, why don't we lay out? And, Mike McCartney will announce him, and we'll get the crowd reaction. And then I'll say, with that, here's the voice of the Royals, Denny Matthews. And he said, great. Now batting for the A's, center fielder, Johnny Damon. And there was almost like no reaction at all. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I thought there would be boos, cheers, a combination, but it was almost like, it was just kind of sad that people either didn't care or they had completely forgotten that, it was such a big deal that Johnny Damon, would not sign a long-term contract and had to be traded to the A's. I mean, that was kind of the moment that was just like, ooh, that's not very good. But I'm grateful because when a team is playing well, those games are very easy to do. You know that. I mean, and people ask you, oh my gosh, what's it like doing a World Series game? Is it nerve-wracking? And it's a big deal, but those games are easy because everyone cares about the score and every pitch means something. It's just, there's not a lot of long gaps that you have to fill in a meaningful game. But when a team is out of it early in the season or they're out of it in the 3rd or 4th inning, that's really where, as broadcasters, we have to learn how to work. And I had to get away from the stats, and I had to get away from the notes, and I had to go down to the field, and I had to talk to the coaches, and I had to talk to the players, and I had to learn from the coaches. There's always something to learn about the game. There's always something to learn about what a player's working on, so that on Thursday we mentioned he's really been working on staying back on breaking balls. And then when he hits a walk-off on Sunday on a breaking ball, it sounds good because, we've been talking about that on the broadcast. So I don't ever want to go back to that again.
Right.
But at the same time, I don't think I'd be the broadcaster that I am today. I don't think there would be as much depth because it's a lot harder work when a team is not winning. And yet there's an opportunity there to go places and try different things when every single game isn't that important as far as the standings go. So I am really grateful for that time.
And another baseball man who looked like maybe he was headed in the same path as Dayton Moore. And, he came aboard, and it was it was as good a hire as you could make in baseball. The name was out there. He came from a great organization. And it took a long while for that to happen. And, it's clearly was a situation that maybe didn't, and could have ended up not happening, but it did. Dayton obviously did the right things, knew what he was doing, ended up being rewarded with back-to-back World Series. But, 4 or 5 years in, it still wasn't happening. What was your impression through that period? He clearly had the ideas that would end up working, but they weren't.
Yeah. Well, I've learned a lot from Dayton, and I've always said that when people ask, what did you learn about baseball in what culminated into 2014 and 2015? And I always say I learned more about leadership than anything else that led to 2014 and 2015. And if there's one line that stands out among the many, and they're meaningful lines, they're not just little slogans that Dayton will throw out, but I mean, there's always meaning behind it. But Dayton said from the very first day, all of our success is tied together. And the point being that when you pull into Kauffman Stadium and the man or the woman who takes your money when you pull into the parking lot is grumpy or, doesn't treat you right, I mean, it's gonna take away from the experience you have at the ballpark. You're going to go into the ballpark in a bad mood, and even if the team wins, you might still have a bad experience. And the reverse of that is if you're listening to the game on TV or radio and you hear something positive about a player, or you learn something about a player that maybe brings you closer to that player, well, you might buy a ticket and go to the game. And then you go to the game and the parking attendant is a great person, and the usher helps you to your seat. And maybe the team doesn't win that night, but you say, you know what, that was a lot of fun. And I got to see that player that Ryan was talking about in person, and he played a good game, and let's go back again. And so at the time, it just seemed like, whatever. But more and more as time went by, I really understood what that means. All of our success is tied together. And honestly, Dandy, he and I clashed quite a bit in the first couple of years. More my fault than anyone else's, because, we had been so bad for so long that we would use humor at times just to get through it, because it was just like there was just no hope. And Frank Robinson, when he was managing the Giants back in the early 80s and my dad was a coach, I think he was trying to get fired because he had a great line. Someone said, Frank, do you see the light at the end of the tunnel? And Frank said, I don't even see the tunnel. And I think he was fired a day or two after that. And many of those years, none of us even saw the tunnel, let alone the light at the end of the tunnel. And so I think, and I'll just speak from my side, we were irresponsible at times on the air, perpetuating this joke or this humor as if it was accepted for a Major League Baseball team. And Dayton didn't come to Kansas City to be a general manager. Dayton came to Kansas City to win, and to win big. And he realized that there needed to be a change in culture. And yes, we needed better players. Yes, we needed a better farm system. But the expectations had to change. I mean, he didn't want us to be a 500 team. I mean, he wanted to win a World Series. And so there were times that we would say things on the air, and it bothered him. And I didn't get it at first, but I realized that he was right. We're just, if we're not going to be a clown show anymore, then we have to stop acting as though being a clown show is okay. It's not okay. And so he had more of a problem with accepting or making jokes of bad baseball than it did calling out bad baseball, because that's what needed to change as far as culture goes. And so early on, I would get some feedback about, we said something on the air and he didn't appreciate it and I didn't get it, and I was more defensive than I should have been. But then it just started, as the team started to get better, and we're talking years, as you pointed out. It didn't happen right away. But when the team started to get together to get better, and you begin to realize that there was an attitude attached to that, there was a culture attached to that. Dayton didn't let minor league players wear their sunglasses on the front of their hat because it would cover the KC logo, that the logo should mean something, that uniform should mean something. How you wear your uniform in the minor leagues when you get on the field should mean something, because that is the uniform of a major league franchise, with which you're a part of, even though you might be in the minor leagues. And so when it all came together for him, and going back and looking back at it, and the people that he kept and the people that he did not keep when he became general manager, a lot of it goes back to all of our success is tied together. And who's thinking big picture here, and who's not thinking big picture? Who's thinking about themselves? Who's thinking about what's best for the organization? And I'm probably going to sound like I'm picking on somebody else, but he would pick up the bubblegum wrapper in the stairwell, because that's what you do when you care about the place. You don't sit around and wait for someone else to pick it up to see who cares. That was he was going to be an example. And so I have as much respect for Dayton as anyone I've ever met in the game of baseball, because every general manager says the right things at their press conference. I mean, they're all smart enough to do that, but there are very few who live up to what they say in their own example, which leads to another line that he's always said, and I think he models it better than anybody else. You can't lead anybody else until you lead yourself. And so, I hope he's here for a long time, because I love being around him. But when it does come to an end, it's going to be a study on leadership more than it's going to be about the X's and O's of baseball.
And, of course, this occurred under the watch of Ned Yost, an extremely interesting person, and someone who maybe didn't even come close to revealing the side that we, would save him from nobody liking him when they actually won. I've told this story a million times. I'll never forget the first. We didn't staff the Angels series, so I wasn't on the road for that. But the first press conference he did at the ALCS in Baltimore, it finished, and I went on the air, and the first word, Kevin introduced me and said, "What'd you think of the press conference?" And I said, "Who the hell was that?"
Yeah,
Ned Yost, it was like a different person had appeared.
Right.
Give me your evolutionary story with Ned Yost, who you had to spend countless hours talking to in a radio standpoint.
Yeah. Well, I was in that group of people who didn't like him. And to be truthful, I couldn't stand him, because I did not understand, where the attitude was coming from. And I mean, it was like, here's a bunch of members of the media, you and me being in the same boat, who, we're hoping that the Royals do well, but we have a job to do, to ask some of the difficult questions about the players and about games that should have been won that were lost. And we were used to having more candid managers who would just tell you exactly what happened, and every now and then would call out a player. And that just was not Ned's style. Ned was raised by Bobby Cox, who was, always be known as the ultimate players manager. And he had a chip on his shoulder because of what happened to him in Milwaukee. And it took me a few years to figure out Ned, but it was the same theme as Dayton, that, making jokes, not literal jokes, but drawing humor from bad baseball or bad baseball plays or whatever, or calling out his players. And it was just not his style, and there was a reason for it. And I only learned this a couple of years ago. Every year the Royals bring in the previous year's draft class. So this past January, the Royals brought in everybody that was drafted and signed in the 2019 draft, rounds 1 through 40, everybody that signed. And it doesn't matter if you're in the first round or if you're in the 40th round. They're all treated the same, and they come in for this 3 or 4 day orientation, just what to be prepared for in professional baseball. I mean, they do a great job. Most teams just bring in their top prospects, but the Royals every year bring in the previous year's draft class. And I've been asked to go in there and just talk about the media and dealing with the media from a broadcaster point of view. And, they give me about 30 minutes to give a little presentation and answer some questions. And one year, Dayton said something where just the light bulb goes on, and I go, okay, now I get it. And Dayton said because it's not just all the players in there, but all the coaches and the development, special assignment, roving coaches. I mean, everybody is in there from the minor league system along with that draft class. And Dayton, before we dismissed, said, He said, coaches, he's talking to all the coaches in the room, coaches, when we talk with the media before a game or after a game, who are we really talking to? And nobody said anything. He says, we're talking to the players. That's who we're talking to. Now, the player might not be in front of us, but his mother might be listening, his father might be listening, his girlfriend or his wife might be listening, a sibling might be listening, a friend might be listening. So, and the same goes for the players. When you talk, you're talking to your teammates, and you're talking to your coaches in the front office, because that's who's going to hear what you're saying. And I mean, I guess I probably should have figured this out years before, but I thought, okay, and this is at the very end of Ned Yost being Royals manager, but I thought, okay, Ned clearly figured that out. That if a guy goes 0 for 4, strikes out 3 times, and lets a ground ball go through his legs for a loss, yeah, I mean, you're expecting that guy to be buried, but that guy and his family and his friends are going to wonder what the manager is going to say about him after the game. And there's clearly an opportunity to just be honest about this guy blew the game, right? But you're going to need him tonight, and you're going to need him tomorrow night, and you're going to need him the night after that. So what are you going to do? What's the best thing that you can do for that player so that he's able to just wipe that away and move on to the next day? And that was his approach in the press conferences. And, he and Nate Bukaty would have some good battles, and but it was all geared towards building up the esteem and the confidence of the player, and it worked.
Give me a little bit. We could do 10 podcasts about it, but just encapsulate a little bit with maybe a moment or two, an anecdote or two, the 2 championship years.
Well, the first one was just a blur. I remember when the Royals clinched at least a playoff spot on a Friday night in Chicago, and we were either going to be a wild card at home, a wild card on the road, or there was a very remote chance that we could go to Detroit and play for the division title. And that didn't work out. And as it turned out, we get to have the wild card game at home. And if there was one call that I wish I could have back, it was the last out in Chicago. And I thought way too much about it because, I mean, I didn't know Danny. I thought that might be, that, as far as I was concerned, that was going to be the greatest moment of that season. And I'd been to enough fan fests and I'd heard enough year in review videos to know, like, if you're gonna make a call, say something not that makes you look good or makes you sound clever. What's something that they can use the next year for a highlight video? And I was just overthinking it, of the the playoff drought and blah blah blah. And who would have ever thought that would be the last thing that anyone would remember from 2014 after the wild card game and then sweeping the Angels? I mean, it was just that team just got on a roll, and it was, I think there was very gratifying, not just for the organization, but I think for the players, because I'm sure, all those players, when they were in the minor leagues, they were hearing the jokes about, man, are you sure you want to get called up by the Royals, or are you going to ask to be traded as bad as they are? And so they win the wild card game, which, they shouldn't have won because most games aren't won like that. Then they go up against the Angels, who had won 98 games and swept them. Then they went up against the Orioles, who had won 96 games and swept them. And then, just came so close in the World Series. And I've heard people say this, and I will respectfully disagree, but people say, if not for Madison Bumgarner, the Royals could have won back-to-back World Series. I don't necessarily believe that, because if they had won in 14, the off-seed, there are so many more demands compared to losing the World Series. I don't know if the same fire would have been there in 2015. But I think by losing the way that we lost in 2014 at home, with the winning run at the plate, the tying run at third base against the greatest single performance in World Series history, it put more fuel on the fire, because I think Kansas Cityans wondered, are we ever going to get there again? Was this our shot? And those guys, we saw a fire in them and a determination in them that I don't know. I'm not saying it would have. There's no way to prove it. But I think you're oversimplifying by saying they could have won back-to-back World Series. I think one led to the other, and I appreciated the second one much more than the first one. The first one was a blur, Ned Yost said, hey, you need to sit back and soak all this in because it goes by so fast. You're going to go home in the off season and be like, man, I really wish I would have soaked that in more. And he was right. I remember so little from 14, and I did a much better job of just kind of taking it all in 2015. But my memories, Danny, are not so much about the games. I remember after the wild card game, I had to walk through the concourse from the radio booth to rival sports bar in right field to do television post game, and just to watch the people react. When they won the World Series in 15, just to stand on the field and watch the players celebrate with their families, and then the fans that were there in New York, stayed late behind the dugout, landing and at the airport the next day, and the bus drive to Kauffman Stadium, and people hanging over the overpasses, and everyone waiting for us at Kauffman Stadium, and then obviously that parade. I mean, those memories are much more vivid than the games themselves.
All through this journey, and especially the part towards the end where it got better, you're starting to raise a young family, and a fairly large young family. Tell me about, you said you wanted to get married, you said you wanted to have kids. What was it like for you to start a family in a world where you're going to be away a lot, and you're going to have to lean on your spouse a lot? And obviously there's going to be a lot of gratification and a lot of credit to be given to others, but for yourself, what's that been like?
Well, it's the worst part of the job now. When I was young and single, there really was not a big difference between home and on the road. I mean, I was alone either way, and I didn't mind being on the road and staying in hotels and going to the ballparks and all that. But I remember hearing Vin Scully years and years ago do an interview, and someone said, what's the worst part of the job? And he said the loneliness on the road and missing my family. This is before I had kids. And in the same interview, someone said, what's your favorite ballpark on the road? And he said, none of them. There's no place like home. And I thought, well, that's just Vin Scully being Vin Scully. But more and more, that's what it's like for me. I mean, it's just I have to leave 4 young children behind, and I have to leave my wife, who does have some help during the season, but it's not the same. And they're growing up and they're experiencing things, and I'm not there. And so I have moments every season where I literally something happened at home, the kids are misbehaving, or something broke, or the kids are just sad, or my wife's just overwhelmed by the demands of taking care of 4 kids while I'm eating a crab cake in Baltimore or something like that. And I'll I will be literally staring out of the window of my hotel, and I will ask myself, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? And I will look back and I'll say, I got to do this and I got to do that, and is that long enough? Is it time for me just to find something else to do and go home and raise my children and be more present as a husband? And but I'm getting older, not younger. I don't know what else I would do. And my boys are getting older now, where they enjoy what I do more. They watch the games when I'm on the road. Their kids think it's cool that their dad's a broadcaster for the Royals, so that that helps. But it is hard. It's very difficult, and I don't know what else I could do with my life at this point. So we just try and get through it every year. But my wife said to me about 4 or 5 years ago, she said, as hard as it is during the season, I don't think I would trade the 5 months that you get to be home in the off season every day and be part of our lives. I don't think I would trade that away. So what we try and do now is just make the most of those 5 months. And now, we're getting some bonus time now that we'll probably never get again as a family. There's no school to go to. There are no games to go to. There are no school activities to go to. But the very long answer to your short question is the traveling has become the worst part of the job.
And obviously you do have to lean on your spouse, and it's somebody who was your friend, then it became a romantic thing, then became your wife, and then now is the mother of your children. Take a few minutes to give some plaudits to Sarah.
Well, she has the hardest job, and she's had to go out of town a few times for her work. Mm-hmm. And I'll be home with the kids, and it's good for me it's good for me to know that when she calls and something's gone wrong at home, and I can fall into that trap of, okay, settle down, it's not that big of a deal. Well, when I'm home alone with them for an extended period of time, I get to see what that's like. But I know that she's coming home in a couple of days. For her, I might be coming home in a couple of days, but I'm just going to be home for about 4 or 5 days, and then I'm going to leave again, and then I'm going to leave again, and then I'm going to leave again. I mean, it's just a grind mentally. And so, I mean, I can't, in order for me to have my cake and eat it too, and that is to be married and have a big family and be a full-time baseball broadcaster, I do have to have a strong person at home. And it gets a little bit easier every year because,
right,
the kids are able to entertain themselves more. They play together more. We see more and more times where, 2 or 3 kids are playing together. Every now and then all 4 of them are playing together. But I don't, just hearing from other guys who have been through this, that there's never going to come a point where it's going to be easy. I mean, it's always going to be a challenge. And so, that's the worst feeling that I have is leaving her when I drive to the ballpark on that day and my suitcase is in the back of the truck and I know I'm going to be gone for a week. And I mean this from the bottom of my heart. This is not, just trying to be sappy, but somebody asked me, they said, what's a good day for you when you're on the road? Is it having a great dinner or getting a good night's sleep or, calling a game-winning home run and, it's on the highlight show? And I said, you know what, the good day for me on the road is when I call home before the game and I said, how'd it go today? And Sarah says, today was a really good day. That's a good day for me.
There you go. I will say this, that your kids are going to obviously get some advantages that other kids don't have, and I'll tell this quick story. When I was at the ballpark all the time and my older daughter, I had 2, was young, one day she came to the ballpark and we had tickets. And so normally, especially then, the Royals weren't that good, she'd be sitting in the 3rd or 4th row. So anyway, this particular day, we walked down, and it was a day off for me, and we walked down and we settle in, and we're about 18 rows from the field. And she looks at me and she goes, Daddy, what's wrong with the tickets today? And I'm like, you are so spoiled. You are so damn spoiled. And I'm sure you'll have an experience like that eventually. Back to baseball just for a second. The Royals just had this meteoric, unbelievable experience. And, they had that, and they did it in a unique way. That's one of the things I thought of that, really made it fun for the fans. They played baseball in a different way. They won in a different way. But it turned back the other way so sharply. How disappointing was that for you, or how jarring was it for you that the Royals did return to being a 100-loss team so fast, and maybe something you never thought would happen again?
Yeah, I don't think we expected 104 and 103 losses in back-to-back years again. But it was also a reminder of how difficult it is to win. And I'm not, I want to make sure that I'm not sounding like a homer when I say this, but there's some holes that needed to be filled that weren't filled when Dayton went for it, and he traded away a lot of players when he went for it. And there are a lot of general managers that don't go all in the way Dayton Moore went all in, especially in 2015 when he went after Johnny Cueto and Ben Zobrist, because everyone wants to win a World Series, but not every general manager is willing to go all in to do that. And he did, and he was true to his word that we're here to win a World Series, not just to be good every year. And then coming from Minnesota, I have a lot of college friends there, and when every time the Twins don't, when they have a losing season or they get bumped in the first round like they did last year, they're complaining. And I remember when they won 6 divisions in 9 years. I mean, that's an incredible accomplishment. 6 divisions in 9 years, and that is not a huge market, Minneapolis. And they were playing in the Metrodome, and they were getting no revenue at that time. And I would remind them that was a heck of a run. They're like, yeah, but they never got past the first round except one time. They never got to a World Series. And so I asked an executive with the Twins. I said, if you could go back in time would you take back-to-back, would you take a long string of losing seasons, back-to-back World Series, winning one, and then another string of losing seasons, although the Royals didn't have, they had competitive teams in 16 and 17, but you see my point. Or would you take what you had, 6 divisions in 9 years, and just roll the dice in the postseason? And he said, I'd take the 6 divisions in 9 years. So it's just a different mindset. Some teams are just, hey, let's not give up too much. I mean, yeah, we might be able to win a World Series if we trade these prospects, but gosh, if that doesn't work. And it's kind of a fear of losing mentality instead of, the thrill of winning mentality. And Dayton went for it. And so, we're paying the price for that. Yordano Ventura's passing, didn't help. Adalberto Mondesi's injuries didn't help. Bubba Starling taking until last year to get to the big leagues, didn't help. So there was, Kyle Zimmer not getting to the big leagues until last year didn't help. I mean, those were first-round draft picks, and those guys all would have made a difference, had they been farther along in their career. But I think so. To your first question, no, I wasn't expecting this, but it's different now because there's a regime in place that is confident. They've done it once. They're confident they can do it again. They think they can do it better. I don't know how you do it better when you go to 2 World Series and you win one, but Dayton's goal is exactly what you just described. The next time around for him is to sustain it for a longer period of time. So it's different now. I mean, when they were losing before the 2 World Series, Danny, it was I go back to that great Frank Robinson line. Do you see the light at the end of the tunnel? I don't even see the tunnel. Well, now you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, there's some really good players on this team that have a chance to lead this team back into the postseason, a chance to be elite players. So it's just a different feeling now than it was then.
I probably will not be alive to give you some stick if this turns out to not be the case, but you go to the ballpark every day and share a broadcast booth and or a microphone with Denny Matthews, who is significantly your senior and still is broadcasting, and who knows when he's ever going to stop. Mm-hmm. Could you ever see yourself doing that?
Yeah, I could. I remember having a conversation with Joe Buck a long time ago, and we were talking about his dad, and he said something I never forgot. He said, no one ever retires when they say they're going to retire. And it's because it's just such a great job. And especially when you get to a point like Denny is where you've earned the opportunity to take some road games off and recharge. So when we're coming home from a West Coast trip and we're all dragging ourselves to the ballpark, Denny comes bouncing in after having a week off and, managing his tomato plants in his backyard and, hey, how was the trip? And he knows the answer to the question before he even asks it. But, so I think if I was able to do it that long where I could take some trips off and maybe, Sarah could travel with me and enjoy some of that time on the road. There's a reason why guys do it into their 70s and sometimes their 80s. It's a great job. And I think if you were to ask Denny, he would have told you that, he was going to retire a long time ago. In fact, I could find the old press release for you, Danny. When I took the job in 99, Herc Robinson said on the press release, and I got to find this because I quote it all the time, that Denny is probably going to do this for about 3 or 4 more years, and we think Ryan could slide into that position. That was 22 years ago. So there's part of the answer to your question. I mean, will I make it as long as Denny? I don't know. But for me to sit here and say, oh, no, when I turn 65 or 67 or whatever, that's going to be enough for me, that's much easier said now than when that time actually comes.
This podcast was made possible by our great sponsors like Easton Roofing, the presenting sponsor of Kansas City Profiles at the Danny Klingscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Easton Roofing, where integrity matters. We hope you enjoyed the latest Danny Klingscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Come back soon for something fresh and new.